Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out the radio version of the show every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern on WDJY 99.1 in Atlanta. We also air on a podcasting network in Los Angeles called the 405 Media. There's a TV version of the show that airs on KMVT 15 in Silicon Valley at 8 p.m. Pacific on Tuesday nights. Both versions of the show air in other states. For these show times, plus past episodes, please visit the show's website at buildingthefutureshow.com. The music for the show is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com. I want to invite all of you in the Building the Future community to join me at SUPEX, the Startup Expo in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, this July 26th, where I'll be the MC. SUPEX is one of the largest and best startup conferences in the U.S. and the official gathering of the Building the Future community this summer. SUPEX has cutting-edge content, a cool startup competition, and a half-day forum this year called #WomenForWomen, the largest gathering in the U.S. in 2018 of angel groups, seed funds, and VC funds focused on female founders and female entrepreneurs. For more information, visit www.sup-x.org. I hope to see all my Building the Future friends there. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Rahul Pangam. He's the co-founder and CEO at Simility. Rahul, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing at Simility is actually really, really interesting and cool. And selfishly, I'm kind of fascinated by the whole space. But maybe before we get into all that fun stuff, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Mumbai, in India, and I lived there up until I finished my undergraduate in engineering, right? And it was sort of a fascinating world growing up because India was still, I would say, early stages of being a developing country, so sort of access to technology was limited, right? I hadn't even used a computer until a lab in my engineering college, right?
Wow.
Versus now, if I look at, I live in the U.S. and I see the access, and it's so different, right? So it's interesting that I'm in the technology world, having not been too familiar with computers up until I was like maybe 17, right?
Sure. But I also think that's actually really kind of interesting for people listening, right? Because a lot of people think that if you weren't like born on a computer, you're kind of screwed, right? And I don't believe that. But yourself, and as we go through your kind of career and kind of what you're doing now, it'll become very clear to the listener that it's very much a myth. But I am curious to step back for a second. You took electrical engineering. What got you passionate about that kind of growing up? Was there like a defining moment or something that made you want to take that, or what made you want to go into that?
Yeah, so I think it again goes back to like the world around you and sort of what you're familiar with. And I think sort of the most ubiquitous technology was like electrical stuff, right? Where, people were opening up motors and repairing them, or you had these little kits growing up where, you could turn on the lights, we're connecting wires, right?
Sure.
So that's sort of your familiarity with what you consider as technology in a world absent computers, absent electronics, and all of that.
Sure.
And so you grow up dreaming that, hey, you know what? I'm going to be really good at this when I grow up, right? I'm going to be able to figure out some of this stuff and, and fix sort of much bigger things. And that got me interested in electrical engineering, right? And that was my start to technology.
Interesting. So you also, walk me through your journey from India moving to America. Did you move to America to get your MBA, or walk me through that kind of process?
Sure. So I completed my bachelor's in electrical engineering, like I mentioned, in India.
Yeah.
And at the time, this was 1997, 98.
Okay.
And the sort of big buzz around that time was Y2K, right? Fixing this code at every place, right? Where there was, it was not an elegant way to handle the change of a year to 2000. And so India had this massive recruiting push where everybody who who had a remote analytical ability, right, even remotely, competence in that area, was pushed into, hey, I have this job that pays you 3 times more than an electrical engineer. And by the way, so my first job, right, it was programming.
Okay.
And literally they told me, we will teach you what to do, and you can do it. You have to have no background in computers or programming. And for me, that was fascinating. Well,
wow.
You pay me for me to learn? Who says no to that?
Yeah, totally. That's fascinating.
So that was my start, right?
Okay.
And then I realized that, hey, I had learned a lot about programming in the year that I spent in this sort of Y2K environment. And I had this huge knowledge about electrical engineering. And I had to blend the two, right? I wanted to apply my newfound understanding of programming to how you control electrical networks and so on and so forth.
Interesting.
So I quit my job and I came to the U.S. to get a master's because there wasn't much in India in terms of that kind of advanced technology at the time, right? In terms of electrical networks and how to use computer programs to control that. So came here for my master's and essentially ended up working at GE post doing my master's, where we were writing algorithms to decide, what generator to bring up, how much capacity to ramp up during the day, night. All of that could be automated, wherein depending on the loads and people's usage patterns, all the electrical networks and where how it flows through distribution networks, all that was controlled, right?
Sure.
And sort of that was my foray, my first sort of professional job in the U.S. post-masters, which was controlling electric networks, grids, through the use of sort of sophisticated algorithms, right? Post that, GE is great in terms of building techno business leaders.
Sure.
And so as I progressed, I realized that I was starting to manage projects and sort of customer engagements, and that got me interested in the business side of things. Went back, got my MBA from Michigan, and then came to Google, right? And that led me down the journey I'm on today, right?
Sure.
But sort of that's my pre-Google world, right? That's how I got there.
Sure. So you were at Google for a number of years in a bunch of different roles. Walk us through kind of what you kind of did at Google, and then and up until you decided to co-found your own company.
Sure. So right after my MBA, I joined Google, and I was managing a group that was responsible for monitoring click fraud, right?
Okay.
And the easiest way to explain click fraud to folks who are not, who are not familiar with the space is, look, if I write a blog, about, I don't know, bicycles or, cooking,
Sure.
I can put ads on that blog, and I get money every time somebody clicks on the ad.
Sure.
So what a lot of savvy people do is they essentially either have bots click on the ad so they can make more money, or they have a bunch of click farms with sort of low-cost labor doing those clicks, right?
Sure.
And so essentially advertisers are paying for clicks that are not real users, that are manufactured clicks, so to say. And this was a big area of focus for Google, simply because 99% of the revenue came from advertising.
Sure.
And
yep.
making sure advertisers trust that money is going in the right place, you need to monitor these clicks and make sure that all the users are real users and not sort of these manufactured clicks, right?
Yeah.
And so I started managing that team coming out of my business school background. And Google was on a very high growth path at the time, right? This was 2007, 2008.
Sure.
I was probably one of the first 10,000 employees, and the company has grown much bigger since then.
Sure.
But a lot was happening, right? And we were building new new advertising products, new products for like social engagement like Google Plus, Gmail was taking off. And each of these product lines had their own sort of challenges and, product considerations around how to control fraud, spam, abuse, right?
Sure.
So on Google Plus, you could have a lot of like fake followers, or you could create fake accounts. On ads, you could put ads that were violating policies. So, for example, if you're not allowed to advertise for certain products, right, but you circumvented those policies somehow.
Right.
Or in Gmail, it could be spammy email, right, and scams. So this was sort of a very prevalent sort of need across all the products, right?
Sure.
And there wasn't a lot of like prior best practices, because a lot of the things Google was doing, it was at the forefront of innovation, right, in the digital world.
Totally, yeah. Like it's never been a problem before, right?
Yeah, or maybe it was very early. Everybody was in the same boat, right?
Yeah. It was a problem, but they were the first people to really kind of start to solve it. Is that fair? That's a better way of putting it. Yeah.
Okay. That's absolutely right. And then the same with search, right? You could game search rankings, and people thought you could stuff keywords and get to the top of the search rankings. And all of these, there wasn't a huge lot of like established literature around how to sort of manage these, right?
Sure.
And so sort of we figured out as we went along, we sort of built the systems and so on and so forth to manage fraud, abuse, and risk and protect our users in this sort of new digital world. Because even for our users, this was their first foray into what digital is, right? From a social standpoint, communication standpoint, buying things standpoint, searching for information standpoint, right?
Sure.
And so it was interesting because we were seeing sort of the evolution of a new way of how people would buy, how they would interact, how they would communicate, and how you could protect them, right? And their payments and their accounts and everything from bad actors. A fascinating journey, right? I did that till 2014, from 2007 to 2014, which amazing ride.
Yeah, I can imagine, because like I remember those days when Gmail was catching on, and kind of like I remember that time because I've been in tech a long time too, and it's always kind of fascinating to hear from people like yourself that were there, and you're like, I remember like when that got launched, or like I was playing with that, or so it's always kind of fascinating to hear from people like yourself talk about this. Like it sounds really nerdy, but I love it. So walk me through, how did you come up with the idea of Facsimility, and why did you decide to leave Google and co-found your own company?
Yeah, so part of it, as I mentioned, right, people were getting used to this new world. And they don't fully comprehend, what risk they were opening themselves up to, both businesses and consumers, right?
Sure.
As they interacted in the digital world. And I felt like, I could count a handful of companies on my fingers, right? So Google, PayPal, and maybe one or two of the top banks that had the armies of people and the infrastructure and the technology to actually manage this risk really, really well.
Sure.
And the vast majority of businesses had no clue what was even going on. Forget able to manage those risks, right?
Yeah.
Fraud, abuse, scams, and so on, right? And so there was this huge need for solutions that helped them manage that risk. And they weren't going to build all this internally in-house at a bank or a big tech company or an e-commerce site and so on. They would rely on experts to build this for them and monitor it for them, right?
Right.
So there was this huge need, right? And so we had learned about attacks and how fraudsters think and how their mind operates, how patterns unfold in these sort of 7 years, just like, because it's a problem where you have an adversary who's constantly learning and adapting.
Sure.
And so it's all about learning how they think, right? And then you can build systems to sort of take care of the attack. But there's a lot of just learning from experience, right?
Yeah. Well, totally. Well, and like Google still pays people to like find holes and bugs in their own software, and other companies do it too. Like they have these like bounties that like you could win hundreds of thousands of dollars if you like break into this one Google system or whatever, right? So there's like coming from like being in the trenches fixing this stuff to basically leaving Google to basically do this for other people, because you're basically doing what you did at Google for 7 years for businesses now. Is that a very simple high level version of what you guys are doing now?
That is. The only caveat I would add is, the way I see digital, right, disrupting industries, right? The tech industry and media were sort of at the early industries that got disrupted, right?
Sure.
And that trend followed, right? So the next group of businesses that got disrupted was commerce, right? So buying stuff, whether it's digital goods or physical goods. And the next group that got disrupted is fintech, right? Like so financial services. And the one after that will be insurance, and then sort of, government, and everyone is in some stage of early disruption, but like full on disruption. It's moving through these waves, right? And we're like, oh, we were at the early stages of the first group that got disrupted.
Right.
And other people are going to see these same issues 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 8 years from now, 12 years from now.
Sure. No, totally.
And it is up to us to make sure that we can help them understand how to sort of protect themselves, right?
Yep.
So applying the knowledge in different verticals, right? Rather different than Google, right? So commerce and banking and insurance, but the same understanding of like bad actors and how they sort of move and attack, right?
Sure. So was there like a defining moment that were like, okay, I need to do this on my own? Or you just like, what made you decide to actually like go off and co-found the company?
I think, the idea was brewing in my head for like a few months.
Okay.
And I feel like, the time when we started, 2014, entrepreneurs say quite a bit that, we made this happen and all of that. I think, timing is a huge part, right?
Sure.
The market had the appetite for what we were doing.
Right.
Investment was readily available, right? So we could find angel investors and so on and so forth. I could find smart people to build a team around, right? Because all of these are important ingredients for an eventual successful company. Otherwise, it becomes a sort of hobby, side project.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that, right? We wanted to build a formidable company that we could take IPO, right?
Sure.
And so you had to have these basic ingredients as you started the venture. And we were lucky. The timing was perfect. We were in the right place, right, in Silicon Valley.
Sure.
People were excited to like fund us and come work with us. And so a lot of that played into sort of just getting because leaving Google for anybody
fair.
is a huge decision.
Yeah, well,
right?
because a lot of people, that's kind of like their dream job, right? And then you left to go do your own thing. And I think it's great. But, there's a prestige around working there, right?
Oh, absolutely, right. And to your point, I grew up in India, right? So everybody attaches, sort of their self-worth to like what university they went to, what company they work at, right? Sure. And then like leaving sort of at the time, there was a number of employer in the world and the biggest brand name around, right? Sure. Everybody knew Google.
Yeah.
And they're like, what did you do? You left Google to do what?
No,
so it's interesting, right? But the entrepreneurs listening, I think they should take, they should take some bit of like encouragement from this, that, hey, these risks pay off.
100% agree. So I want to dive deeper. I think people have a good understanding of kind of what you guys do, but I really want people to understand what exactly do you guys kind of do at Similarly?
Perfect. Yeah. So Similarly essentially provides a fraud detection and risk management platform.
Okay.
Our primary sort of customer base is businesses, right? So e-commerce stores,
okay,
payment processors, banks, right? And what they use Simility for is, let's say, you're creating a new account at a bank using your mobile phone, or you're applying for a new loan,
okay,
or you're trying to access your already existing account, or you're trying to make a payment, or you're trying to issue, accept credit cards or pay using a credit card. All of these transactions, there's a potential for fraud, right?
Sure.
Either somebody else using your identity to create an account, or logging in after they have compromised, your credentials are compromised, or from a payment standpoint, they have stolen credit cards and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
So the way to tackle all of these, right, is essentially understanding normal behavior of users when they're doing these activities,
right,
and abnormal behavior.
Okay.
And I think big data analytics and machine learning have evolved to a point where you're able to precisely pinpoint what is risky and what is trusted, right?
Okay.
In these transactions.
Automatically, right?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Keep going. Sorry, I just wanted to make that clear.
Yes. And so that's the capability we provide to our clients, right, who are large businesses, large banks, large payment processors, in order to manage their risk of fraud, right, and abuse.
Sure. Instead of them building their own internal kind of fraud detection team, they basically get you guys to handle it. Is that a simplified version of that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I don't really want to go too technical, but if I'm a bank or a business and I'm looking for, fraud detections, and I reach out to you guys, how do you work with me to get it set up without going kind of in the technical kind of space of it, like high level? How does that kind of work?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a couple of mechanisms for getting data from their existing databases into our system,
okay,
and then giving them back a decision score, whatever is needed.
Got you.
And we have either we have JavaScripts on the website or SDKs on the mobile phone, which is picking up some amount of device information or behavior information, just to know if this is a hacked device or so on and so forth, right? There's malware. And then bank is also sending to our software transaction information, right? So person A tried to initiate a $2 million payment, right? And so we combine that data from those two sources, and we say, well, person A has never done more than a $2,000 transaction over the last 6 years.
Right. By
the way, whenever they log in, the IP address always says Canada, but this time it sort of looks like a spoofed IP from what we're understanding the device to be. This is an anomalous transaction, block it, right?
Right, yeah, okay. Or like they put in a transaction in California, and then like an hour later, they're like across the world. You're like, well, that's the second one's probably fraudulent.
Absolutely,
okay.
Right? So they send us data through these sort of JavaScripts and SDKs, and also through the backend if they have any backend database information through APIs, right?
Okay.
That's how we get the data.
Okay, and then as a company or a bank, I have like dashboards or like an interface that I could kind of check in on what's happening, or how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so that's another big part, right? Like, either at the time that you're sort of monitoring this or post-fact, you want to understand the sort of broader behavior, right? What is normal? What is anomalous? Are we within that trend? Are the trends pointing in the right direction? Are the business metrics being met, and all of that? So we have a workbench where you can monitor all this. There's graph databases, there is dashboards, there's control mechanisms which you can use. But essentially giving them a way, because there's so much data and it is so overwhelming. I think the challenge is to like distill it down to a humanly understandable manifestation, which is what we have tools for as well. And they're super effective because, understanding a fraud attack, if you can't visually see the patterns like time sequences and graph networks and all of that, you probably will just miss it, right? If I just dumped the data in a spreadsheet and gave it to you, you wouldn't understand what to look for.
Totally.
So it's a huge part of what we do for them is showing them visually what happened or what is unfolding, and giving them an idea as to what's going on, and suggesting what they should do.
Okay, interesting. That's actually really fascinating.
Thank you.
So, and then I'm assuming you guys provide some sort of analytics as well, which is even a little bit more high level.
Yes, we do. So underlying this entire system is like, big data analytics, a sort of risk engine, decision engine, which are mining the data and sort of providing insights, right, which get used by the user. So we are providing the analytics, very, very relevant to the use cases that the customer is interested in.
Sure. I don't really want to go too technical in this because it's a total black hole, but how do you guys handle kind of your own security at kind of, without getting into the craziness of the black hole technical stuff of that? Because obviously you guys need to be super secure in your own self, right?
Yep. So this is one part where, I have, I tend to think that third parties are better at sort of securing or validating that you are secure versus me self-certifying.
Right.
And so we work with auditors so that there are 2 or 3 standards, right, which are very, very big in my world: FIs, right, payments, PCI DSS, SOC 2, GDPR, which essentially these standards say, what are your hiring practices? How is the data accessed from your company? Where is it stored? Is it encrypted? It's basically like a long laundry list of things that have to be in place to ensure that, you're good stewards of your customers' data, right?
Sure.
And we basically open ourselves up to an audit from a certified auditor who comes in, and every 6 months, depending on the type of audit, 3 months, 6 months, they come in and audit us for all these practices, right?
Interesting.
Because again, in my world, because you're dealing with financial services, and a lot of our clients host this inside their network.
Sure.
So they have their own security practices, but just because of the nature of our clientele, we have to be like top of our game in terms of meeting all these criteria. And we almost always say, you can have a third party come in and check us. Don't take our word, right? And that's what we sort of follow.
Sure. No, I think that's great. I think it's important to cover just in this conversation. But I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. You've mentioned it quickly. You have developers can integrate with you guys. I really want to kind of cover how that kind of works and what, internal kind of developers can actually do to integrate with you guys.
Yeah. So, typically, so we have our published APIs on our website, both. So we have developers on both sides, our end users as developers and third parties that want to integrate with Simility to provide services to our end users, right? So we have both kind of developers.
Sure. So
the first one, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
So the first group of developers, let's say you're working at a bank and you're using Simility, it's pretty easy. We have JSON sort of API formats where we publish our APIs, the formats, and you can use that format and do data exchange with Simility, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty straightforward. Now, if you're a third party, so there are many third parties in this business, right? So you have a curated blacklist of bad IPs, or you provide mapping of like phone number to name, right? These are like many small sort of boutique services that exist in different geographies for different use cases.
Yeah.
And you all are trying to sell to a bank, right?
Sure.
So you want to plug into a data orchestration hub, which can suck this data and help the bank make risk assessment. And you can't sell this directly because without the context of other data points, you're valuable, but not as valuable, right?
Sure.
So if you work with a platform like us, you become tremendously, maybe 5x more valuable than just as a data feed, right?
Sure.
And so we work with third parties as well to help them integrate into the Simility platform so they can provide services to our end clients, right? Enterprise, FIs, and
Gotcha.
payment service providers.
Sure. And then obviously web apps and Android and iOS can work with you guys as well?
Yes. So we have SDKs for Android and iOS.
Perfect. I thought it was worth mentioning because I think that's actually quite a fascinating space. And I think if developers had to build that themselves, well, like you guys are doing, it's a whole company in itself, right? So it makes way more sense to outsource to somebody like you guys if somebody's building something that needs, your guys' services. You wouldn't build it internally into your own stuff. It's so much work, as you know, because you're building it, or have built it, I should say. So I'm curious, though, to change gears a little bit. There's so much stuff kind of happening in the news with, fraud and kind of some trends. I don't necessarily want to, scare people, and it's not all doom and gloom like sometimes it's portrayed in the media. But what kind of stuff have you seen, or your thoughts on some things, that maybe people should at least think about or consider when they're trying to prevent, fraud?
Yeah. I mean, I think, some of the points I mentioned will be relevant to business users and people who are trying to protect their users and manage their risk. And some of these might be applicable to end users, right, who are consumers of services and how they can protect themselves.
Sure.
But I can mention 3 or 4 or 5 just points
Perfect.
that good to think about, right?
Sure.
Again, I'm not going to try and scare people because there's opportunity and there is risk, right? And so I'm gonna paint that picture like sort of a nice mixed balance, right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. So I mean, let's think about even if I look at my way of operating right today in the world, right? About 3 years back, if I wanted to deposit a check in the U.S., I would actually go to an ATM, go to a bank, and deposit it. Today, I scan it on my mobile phone. Right?
Totally. Yep.
So I feel like I consider us to be living in this sort of mobile-first era.
Yep.
And that has done a lot of different things, right? Like you get instant access, low friction to applying for a loan or scanning a check or creating a new account, paying for something, what have you, right? So that is one where in a developed world you've moved from sort of offline, online, and mobile first primarily, right? You're not even saying that's one of my channels. That is my mode of operation unless you force me into a different mode.
Right.
And then there is this whole concept around inclusion, right? Financial inclusion. Like there is a whole subsection of society that was excluded from traditional financial systems, right? Because of, in developed countries, maybe because of credit scores being not that high, or in developing countries because they simply didn't have access to the traditional banking systems.
Right.
And they now all have a mobile phone. So, right, there's a whole new group of users who have no history from a credit standpoint, from a risk standpoint, right? And they're using mobile phones. And as a financial institution, as a business, you want to sell to these users because that's a tremendous explosion in the way you can sell and engage and grow your business and so on and so forth, right? So that's the opportunity, which is mobile first, changes the game in a lot of different ways, especially with the sort of fintech revolution, right?
Sure.
Now put that against the risks, right? So you have, we read in the news about, the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, right? Like developers have access to this data feed. So essentially, they know a lot about me, they know a lot about you, which can answer most questions pretty well, right? So, where did you live in 2008? Okay, I have an answer for that, because these are the questions that get asked when you sometimes apply for a loan or a bank account, right?
Yep.
Then you have the breaches, right? So I'm looking at Saks and Fifth Avenue, MyFitnessPal.
Yep.
So now your credit card numbers are out there. And then you look at sort of the Equifax breach. So your sort of identity is out there, right?
Yep.
I think all of us should assume that some part of information about us is out there that other people have access to. Just in your mind, be ready for that. Don't think like, oh, I'm not the guy who will get impacted by that, right? Just being prepared is better than being ignorant.
Yeah, no, fair.
So I would say that's the second trend, right? All this online access and this high volume data being available on the black market just means you have to be prepared that these credentials, these identities, these credit card numbers are out there and somebody has it, and be prepared for that, right? And so what we're doing is we're helping as people transact online, right? Whether they go to a bank, whether they pay for something, whether they create a new account, we are helping ensure that when those transactions happen, we are able to identify the risky ones from the trusted ones.
Okay.
Because I know that digital is going to be the mode of operation. There's a scale, there's an anonymity with digital that isn't there in the physical world. I know that a lot of this data is floating out there. So if you tell me I'm going to sell you a solution that's going to protect you and nobody's going to take anything from you, I would say that's great, but I can't assume that data is not going to be getting out, right?
Sure.
So you need to live in a world where you acknowledge all this and say, when that time comes, when somebody tries to use my identity, when somebody tries to use my credit card at a place, right, that stability is there to help you assess that risk and block it.
Sure.
Right. So what I'm saying is, assuming all of what's happening today is true, we are here as sort of the safety net, right? Because at the end, everything is means towards an end, right? All this data is being stolen, so somebody can abuse it for some other reason, and we have to make sure that we have sort of covered all the bases in helping businesses understand when these kind of attacks happen, right? When these identities, when these cards get used, how to make sure you can recognize that and protect your consumers against that.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I think I think a good example, or well, tell me if it's a good example. Like something happened to me a couple years ago. My credit card somewhere, I don't know, got online and somebody bought $1,500 worth of, they were like phones, but they were like desk phones. And they had the huge numbers. They were kind of meant for like old people that have trouble kind of pushing buttons or to see. And the transaction went through because I work in tech. I order phones, not all the time, but I kind of run the latest phones. And so that one went through. But the same person tried to order something online from like a sporting goods store. And I can't remember the last time I was in a sporting goods store, never mind bought anything. So they flagged that, and that's how they caught the original kind of $1,500 phone transaction. But like, that's basically a simple example of kind of what you just talked about, right? Where based on my habits, you're like, well, Kevin could have bought a $1,500 or a bunch of stuff at this online kind of phone store because he works at tech and he's bought phones before, but he hasn't been to a sporting goods store in, basically the history that he's owned this credit card. That's probably fraud, right? Is that a really simple version of kind of what you just talked about?
Absolutely. I mean, that is spot on, right? That's, you have a normal behavior pattern.
Sure.
In what you buy, where you buy from, how you buy, what time of the day you buy.
Yeah, sure.
And, as long as the things form within that norm, you can reasonably trust the transaction. But once they start moving away from that norm, then you should question that, right? And this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Sure. You mentioned kind of some other examples. Do you want to keep going with those? Because I think these are great.
Yeah. So, other examples are like somebody, getting a hold of a synthetic identity
Okay.
and applying for a loan, and using a doctor driver's license to scan, being able to answer these. So I got some information about a profile from Facebook. I have access to the stolen identity. I bought it on the black market. And I can't walk into a bank and create an account because you can compare my face and the license and say, oh, this is not the guy, right?
Right.
But I can apply online,
Right.
and I have all the credentials, right? I have a fake, I have a doctor driver's license image. I have the credentials. I can answer any question you ask me based on social footprint information and this and that and all of that available online. And so I can I can apply for a loan as somebody else. I can create a fake account. And this is very prevalent now because, you're allowed to create online accounts without physically showing any kind of proof, right? And it's a very different world online, right?
Sure.
The example I mentioned about check scanning, right? People might doctor the image of the check and, instead of 10,000, make it like, 50,000.
Sure.
Or they might deposit the same check once through the mobile app and then second time in the bank. And sometimes banks are trying to keep customers happy. So they process the check immediately, even though they haven't quite confirmed that this check the payment will be made from the other bank, right?
Right.
So all of these things are like situations which are so different because of the online mobile access and anonymity.
Sure.
And I can go on and on. There's like a long laundry list of these things.
No, sure. I'm curious though. Is there any advice that you would give people to maybe not say like you shouldn't post that, but that they should at least maybe take a second to, think about if they want that information online? Because I think a lot of people don't even know that posting a photo or of this or that or this data can be used against them. But is there something that you'd maybe recommend that, maybe could be used down the road that maybe people don't think about, or at least if they're going to post, they should at least know the risks of posting?
Yeah, so I think one thing to sort of just take a step back and think is be mindful about what you're giving to get something, because there's no free apps.
Right,
there's no free social network. You're not paying for it with money, but you're paying for it with other sort of your digital life information, right? And so, in this sort of Cambridge Analytica breach, I sort of read somewhere that, certain people have like 70 apps that connected to their Facebook accounts, sucking up all kinds of information.
Sure.
And people are just like, oh, this is free. I'm going to click. And, this just paints my face blue, right? Well, a great fun thing to have, but what did you give to be able to get that app, right? And I think we don't consciously think about these things because like, oh, it's free. Yeah. Something I download on my mobile phone. It's like, oh, well, it's going to point me to the nearest, hair cutting place or give me a coupon when I walk into a mall. But it's sucking up my location information. It knows where I am. It is sucking up my buying information, all of that.
Right.
So what is the benefit I'm getting from this app and what am I giving up to get that benefit? I don't think people make a conscious trade-off in their head. They're just like, oh, this is free. I'm going to download it. Right?
Sure.
So I think we need to acknowledge that, especially in the light of these sort of breaches. What are you getting and what are you giving up to get that? And if you make a conscious choice, well, I'm okay to I want to share pictures with my friends, and I'm okay if, pictures can be seen by others or might end up in a place where I don't want them to end up, and I'll only limit myself to certain kind of pictures, or I'm not going to have my kids' pictures on there. I'm just going to have my pictures on there, which is fine. But I think you need to think through that, right? Which is it's an unconscious decision saying, oh, I'm going to use this app, right, without thinking through what you're giving up.
No, I think that's really good advice, and I kind of why I asked the question is because it's good for somebody like you that has the background in this to give this kind of advice, right? Because I think we're kind of at an interesting point right now, and like, do you? Well, obviously nobody knows for sure, but do you think there's going to be a big backlash at kind of some of these freer kind of services or apps, or do you think the general public just doesn't care enough yet because it really hasn't directly affected them yet? Like, or is it kind of too early to tell?
I think it may be slightly too early to tell. I mean, I have a biased view, right?
Sure.
If you work in a sausage factory, you have a very different definition of like meat than the person who eats the sausage.
Sure.
So because I deal with the bad actors all the time, I just have a heightened level of awareness about these things. I do think that, people have taken sort of privacy, data security, identity online very casually. And I do see when I look at Europe, for example, there's GDPR, there's PSD2. Government is bringing in regulations, right? The regulatory bodies are clamping down, saying, look, you have to be the right to be forgotten. Every institution has to do a bare minimum to monitor things. You have to protect the data in a certain way. You have to maintain encryption, all of that, right? Because just like I mentioned earlier on, you need third parties to mandate and monitor that for you.
Right.
And I think that is coming, right? I think the sort of regulation, this is, it's great. Innovation fosters in sort of tech. But there are certain aspects around their privacy, security, identity that need to have a better framework, right, of how the information gets used, where it gets stored, how is it stored, who can use it, who can access it. These are questions that will define whether there's a backlash, whether people have a level of comfort and all of that. But I think we're in the early days of that, right, answering those questions.
Yeah, the other thing that I obviously no idea where this is going to go. I think the thing that I'm going to find really fascinating is just even, I'm 35, just so we have some context, but if you've been posting stuff, good, bad, or other, online since you were like in your teens or maybe even younger, when you're like 20 or 30 or 40, like your whole life is basically potentially free online, which could be good or bad, or maybe other. Like, I think that, to me, just that concept is like completely fascinating.
That's that is so true. I mean, I don't think of it this way, right? Like I said, right, until, I don't know, I'm 42, right? So until age 30, I really didn't have a massive footprint online, right?
Sure.
Social footprint or financial footprint or what have you, right?
Yeah.
So like more than half my life is not there. But you're right. If I was born in this post-digital world, my entire life is on there. Like from my parents posting my baby pictures all the way up to me posting voluntarily stuff online and others involuntarily posting my stuff online.
Sure.
So how do you live in that world? Because you could potentially know anything and everything about anybody, right?
Sure.
which is so true.
Well, and then you don't even know necessarily what other people have posted about you online, right? Like, it's interesting just how that kind of sorts itself out going forward. And again, like, I don't really want to scare people. I just want to get people kind of thinking about this stuff when they're posting their kids' photos online or stuff like that. Like, I'm not saying that there will ever be consequences, but it's something to, maybe rethink about.
Absolutely, right? Just be aware, be mindful, make those trade-offs. Don't just be automatic and casual about, using stuff, sharing stuff. Like I said, there's a huge opportunity in terms of financial inclusion, social. I'm communicating with people I've never been in touch with for 20 years, right? Because of social networks.
Sure.
Right. And so that opportunity is there, right? Unbelievable. Never in my life I would have stayed connected with that many people or buy things from the other corner of the world that get shipped to my house, right? But sure. I'm making those trade-offs consciously. If I really need X, I'm okay to give up Y, right? Yeah. And that's fine.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. So we're kind of coming to the end of the show, but I want to make sure we kind of cover everything that you want to cover. Is there anything else that, you guys do at Simility that maybe we didn't cover that you want to kind of mention?
No, I think, you did a great job, I think, covering the entire spectrum, from sort of industry landscape to, what the user should care about and how businesses, should think about simility and, specific examples of, use cases. And so I think, no, you did a great job. This is very rare. I'm not at a loss of words most times,
Well, no,
but now I am.
No, that's good though. I think just for kind of to close out the show for the listener, I think where can they get more information about you guys and maybe schedule a demo?
Yeah, so they can visit our website, simility.com. To schedule a demo. I think the other thing, to your point about how can users protect themselves?
Okay.
How can businesses get smarter about protecting their users, right?
Sure.
So banks, payment providers, e-commerce stores, media companies. We have a lot of webinars, white papers, solution studies, case studies, which are freely available on our website. We don't have to use Simility, but just like consumers need to educate themselves and know the trade-offs of what am I doing online and what's the cost, businesses need to know the trade-off. Okay, I'm launching this new product. It's going to give access to so many people, to so much data. What do I need to do to make sure I'm doing enough to protect my users, right?
Sure.
And there's a lot of material available on our website, right? Like I said, from webinars to white papers, so that you can educate yourself and you can come up to speed without ever using Simility, right?
Sure.
So do that.
No,
if you're interested.
Yeah, I think I actually have your resources page up right now, and you guys have case studies kind of broken out between banking and e-commerce, marketplace, payments, tutorials, webinars. So you have tons of resources here. I'm just scrolling through it actually right now. So, well, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you. And if people want to kind of get more information about you guys, it's simility.com.
That's right.
Perfect.
Simility.
Well, thanks again for doing this, and have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Kevin. You have a good day too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit the show's website at buildingthefutureshow.com. Also check us out on Facebook at Building the Future Show and follow us on Twitter at Building Show. The music for the show is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.